Here we are, Larry Elder. Welcome to the Candace Owens
Well,
show. And we're calling the other side racist. We don't know our own history, right? We've been acting uneducated. We've been acting emotional, right? If they can drum up Black Lives Matters and get us screaming in the streets, burning down our own neighborhoods, do we have the right to be offended until we change the way we act?
Candace, 90% of black people thought O.J. Simpson was innocent. What is that? What is that? And during that trial, I said to myself, what does that do to the people that look at black people? What does that do to your level of respect for black people?
It goes down.
This evidence is overwhelming. The man did everything but leave his business card at the crime scene. and you're telling me he's innocent? Are you smoking something? Hair, fiber, blood, motive. And he didn't do it?
He didn't leave his business card, though. He did not leave his business card. So maybe he was innocent.
Maybe, yeah.
I know. And if you look at it objectively, their liberalism is almost like a mass brainwashing. Like, I really do feel that when I listen to these people, they are parroting talking points. But when you get to the substance of it, there is no substance of it. It's just, well, black people were slaves. You have to acknowledge that at a certain point there was systemic racism. That's kind of like where it comes from.
Right. It was when Dave Rubin was going on about institutional racism. And I said, like what? And it looked as if he'd been hit in the head with a 2x4 because he was used to saying things like structural racism, systemic racism, institutional racism, and nobody's saying, what specifically are you talking about? What is your data to suggest that there's something such as institutional racism? And he had nothing. And he realized that he needed to recheck his assumptions. And so I got him on this journey to rethink his assumptions. The Washington Post did an analysis of how many people were killed by the police in the recent years, 1,000 of them. 500 of them were white, 250 were black. There were more unarmed white men killed by the police than unarmed black men. I was invited to Ohio State to give a speech before the football team by Coach Urban Meyer, then the coach. He called me and he asked me if I'd come in to talk to his players. So I came to the class and I addressed all these football players, and they were like this, Candace. They were not having it. They were not having it.
Black and
most
conservative.
of them were black, and they were all like this. And I'm sure they thought it was Uncle Tom and a sellout and all the words you've heard before.
Yep.
And I said, there were about 16 unarmed black men killed last year by the police. And you can probably name the unarmed black men that have been killed in recent years, whether it's Eric Gardner or Freddie Gray, Kendrick Bland. We all know their names. Michael Brown. I said there were more unarmed white men killed by the police than unarmed black men. Name one. Room was silent for almost 20 seconds. And when you talk to cops, Candace, they will tell you they are more hesitant to pull the trigger on a black suspect than a white suspect. And this has been documented. There's an economist named Roland Fryer. He's at Harvard. He is so brilliant. He's I think he's the youngest tenured professor at Harvard ever, no matter the subject. And he did a study on whether or not the police were using deadly force against black people disproportionately. And he assumed he was going to find out that they were. He was shocked. He said it was the most shocking and surprising finding of his career.
Wow.
He found out the police were more hesitant to pull the trigger on a black person than on a white person. There was another study done by some researchers at a university in Washington that found the same thing. It's just a lie. And the police and the feds do a survey called I think it's called the Police Public Contact Survey every 2 or 3 years. They ask people if you had any interaction with the police, and if you did, tell us about your interaction, by race, by gender, by whatever. And it turns out they can't find any pattern of discrimination against black people. And I'm not saying that there aren't bad cops, obviously. There are bad talk show hosts, there are bad doctors, there are bad lawyers.
They're bad people.
But a systemic, planned out institutional kind of thing, the data are not there. And you know it's not there because if it were, there'd have been class action lawsuits against the police by all these black lawyers who are around, who are making this argument.
Right. There's something about progressive policies and progressive perspectives that always lead to progressive results, right?
And regarding what the damage this false accusation does, the police pull back. Once you call them racist, and they're afraid that if they pull somebody over who's black, they're going to be accused of racism. They may even be prosecuted. They may even lose their pension. They're going to pull back. And when they pull back, crime goes up. The very people that these people, Black Lives Matter, claim that they care about, those are the ones who are hurt the most.
Right.
Why isn't Black Lives Matter out here in South Central Los Angeles dealing with the Crips and the Bloods? They're killing each other.
Black on black, and that goes against the narrative. Right.
6,000 black people were killed last year, almost all of them killed by other black people,
right,
as opposed to a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of unarmed black people killed by the police. And unarmed, by the way, does not mean not dangerous. Michael Brown was unarmed, but they found his DNA on the officer's gun. He was trying to get the gun.
Right.
So even if you're unarmed, doesn't mean you're not dangerous.
So why do you think it is that our community never wants to hold the mirror up to ourselves?
Because that would then mean blaming the victim. That's how they see it. It's easier to yell and scream about racism than it is to look at black people and say, we have to change our behavior. We have to do better. Right. And we have to raise our game. You remember when the Dream Team destroyed the whole world in the Olympics and we won by 40, 50 points? The rest of the world didn't say, let's lower the hoop. Let's widen the hoop for us. They got better. They raised their game. And the rest of the world is no longer getting destroyed the way they used to. We need to raise our game. We need to graduate from high school. We need to stop having children outside of wedlock. We need to do the right thing by the children that we bring into the world. And we're not doing that. I was able to get one so-called black leader on my show. His name is Kwesi Mfume. At the time, he was head of the NAACP. And I said, Mr. Mfume, as between the presence of white racism or the absence of black fathers, which poses the bigger threat to the black community? To his credit, he said, without missing a beat, the absence of black fathers. And that is the number one, number two, number three, number four, and number five problem in the black community. And a kid today is less likely to be born under a roof with his biological mother and biological father than a kid during slavery. In 1965, 25% of black kids were born outside of wedlock. Now that number is almost 70%. Right. You cannot blame that on slavery. Right. Clearly, 2019 is less racist than 1965, which is less racist than 1865. That is the number one problem facing the black community. And forget about Larry Elder. Obama said a kid who does not have a father in the house is 5 times more likely to be poor, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 20 times more likely to end up in jail. It is far and away the number one problem. Now, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that problem other than tell people to change their behavior, change their attitude, and behave more responsibly? Right. Let me give a mild defense of LBJ. LBJ gave a speech where he talked about welfare dependency, and he said he feared it. He did not want people to become dependent. He naively thought that that this war on poverty would make people less likely to be dependent. FDR said the same thing when he announced his New Deal program. He did not want people to be. He called welfare a subtle narcotic that destroys initiative. Now they were wrong about the effects of their plans, but their intent was, I believe, to motivate people. Jack Kennedy is celebrated by the left. There's a book called The Dark Side of Camelot. He said some pretty nasty things too. He also very badly treated Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. postponed his wedding. He was going to marry a white woman, a white actress, because he knew that it would hurt Kennedy with the South in 1960. Sammy Davis Jr. worked real hard to get him elected. Kennedy got elected. Sammy Davis Jr. got married and was disinvited from performing at the inaugural. He wasn't invited. He was invited, and then they took his invitation away. And that's because JFK was afraid that having Sammy Davis with his white wife would alienate members of the South, even though he'd already won the election. It was hideous, and racist. The good news is that the information seems to be that most people get their influences from their mom, their dad, a relative, a member of the clergy, a teacher. So yeah, you have all these stars who say this, that, and the other, but most people learn how to behave, learn their values from people around them, close to them. And that's why it's so important for there to be a mother and a father in the house.
That's exactly right.
Economics of racism.
Right.
When the demand for racism exceeds the supply, you have to find new sources.
You have to find new sources.
You have to find new sources.
And is that perhaps
that's what it is.
Were they doing real things in the beginning and now they're
at one time, Jesse Jackson was an aide to MLK, and he had friction. Mm-hmm. MLK thought he was a hothead, and told Jesse Jackson at some time you're going to get your own individual niche, but in the meantime, leave me alone. That was an exchange they once had, according to a book called Thunder in America. So I think that initially his heart was in the right place, but then things changed. Rather than accept the victory, the civil rights movement, you got the good guys won. Let's now convert the troops to civilian duty, to peaceful duty.
Right. They
act as if it never happened. Right. I recall reading an article about one of the Black Panthers. I think it was Huey Newton. And he said, this is in the 70s or 80s, and he said, things are so boring now. And I said to myself, this guy preferred it the way it was in the 60s?
Right.
You preferred us to be out in the streets and rioting? You preferred that to right now?
I think that, yes, many people are addicted to the drama. They're just addicted to the drama, and they're bored.
And because elevating Black people now requires hard work, telling them to be responsible, telling them not to blame other people, and that's hard work. It's much easier to point to somebody else and say, here's your plight. Here's why you're the way you are. And that's why they don't want to do this. And that's why people like you and me are considered to be evil, considered to be enemies. There's an economist from Harvard named George Borjas. He's probably done more work on the impact of legal and illegal immigration than any other economist in the country. And he says there's no question that unskilled illegal aliens compete for jobs held by unskilled blacks and browns living in the inner city, and puts downward pressure on their wages. Black people have higher self-esteem than white people do. Almost every test has shown that for decades. Black people have higher self-esteem than white people do. Black women are far more confident about their bodies than white women are. White women are obsessed with this Barbie doll kind of waist, and black women are not obsessed with that. So don't tell me that black people have low self-esteem. We have very high self-esteem.
Right. That's your camera. Bub's got the 2 minutes on the clock.
Okay.
On your mark, get set. Larry Elder.
My 2-minute vibration is to all young people in this country, irrespective of race, irrespective of color, irrespective of gender. This is the greatest country God ever created. You hit the lottery when you were born in America. And if you were lucky enough to have 2 loving parents who helped to raise you, you hit the lottery again. Work hard. Invest in yourself. My father always told my brothers and me the following: hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. You cannot control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before you moan and whine about what somebody did to you or said to you, go to the nearest mirror, look at it and say, what could I have done to change the outcome? And finally, no matter how good you are, how hard you work, how ethical you are, sooner or later, bad things are going to happen. How you deal with those bad things will tell whether or not we've raised a man or a woman.